Friend, Shabbat Shalom to everyone. I know people are wondering why is Rabbi Landing wearing an N95 mask. As I look at the reality of COVID-19 in our community and the contagion of the COVID-19 Delta variant, I believe we are in the middle of something that continues to be quite serious. And Becky, Nathan, and I are in close proximity to each other. We're not on top of each other, but we're not constantly being tested about our COVID-19 status. So we try to balance working together in a kind of close quarters with the reality that God knows all of us are out in this world and could be have received the virus, and so I am going to be the most extremely cautious person I possibly can be, and I would encourage everyone else to be as cautious as I am. These are in very difficult times, and I don't have to go into my personal details of the people that I know who have been afflicted by the virus, even being vaccinated. We are in very complicated times, and we as a Jewish community need to be vigilant and thoughtful and cautious. So I don't like doing the service in a COVID-19 mask. It's certainly not comfortable, but it makes me comfortable, and I think it makes me comfortable to be in the presence of my friends, Becky and Nathan. Now, raising kids is not easy. For those of us who are parents or spend some time raising and nurturing children, one of the most difficult things that we face is appropriate discipline. I have discovered that children don't naturally develop into self-directed, respectful, and well-mannered people. They must be guided to do so. And the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends healthy forms of discipline. This is what it says, such as positive reinforcement of appropriate behaviors, limit setting, redirecting, setting future expectations. It recommends that parents do not use spanking, hitting, slapping, threatening, insulting, humiliating, or shaming. Somewhat obvious, but we live in a world where some things need to be stated that don't appear to be so obvious to other people. Clearly, one of the goals of Jewish life is nurturing children towards a healthy adulthood. In my experience, parents, both Jewish and non-Jewish, are overwhelmingly quite dedicated to undertaking the nurturing of their children. And certainly, I see in our congregation so many loving parents who do such a wonderful job nurturing their children. All of that being said, we have in our Torah portion, I don't know the right word to kind of describe it, an extraordinary, in quotation marks, text about child rearing. And as I read it to you, I don't want you to fall off your seat, and this is in the Torah, and just take it in, and then we'll discuss what we should do with it. Here it is. If a man has a wayward and defiant son who does not heed his father or mother and does not obey them even after they discipline him, his father and mother shall take hold of him and bring him out to the elders of the town at the public place of his community. They shall say to the elders of the town, "The son of ours is disloyal and defiant. He does not heed us. He is a glutton and a drunkard." Thereupon the men of his town shall stone him to death. Thus you shall sweep out evil from your midst. All Israel will hear and be afraid. Did you ever hear this commandment?
No.
Are you scared?
I'm a little fearful.
You're very fearful. Now, this is the text. It's found in the book of Deuteronomy. It's a very famous passage. It's referred to as the Ben Sorer. This text is clearly morally reprehensible. It's beyond what we believe a civil society should ever do, of course. And how can the Torah be so crazy, even barbaric? Now, here is what should reassure us, and it's the reason I want to share it with you this evening. The rabbis of the Talmud, the rabbis who created Judaism 2,000 years ago in Babylonia and in Palestine, were deeply troubled by this text. It offended them as much as it offended us. It seems crazy to us. And yet in Judaism, we're not allowed just to take something that we don't like, take a scissors and cut it out of the tradition. That's not something that Judaism deals with. That's not how Judaism deals with confronting reality and changing what necessary. Judaism takes another approach. The Talmud, rabbinic thought, contains an incredible long discussion of this mitzvah, of this wayward child. In these discussions, so many conditions are placed on this mitzvah, this commandment, that it's impossible to carry out the commandment. Here are some of the restrictions that are placed on applying this commandment. The parents in the biblical text must come together to bring the child to the elders and declare, he does not hear our voice. And so the sages concluded that not only must both parents want to bring their child to judgment, they must also be evenly and properly matched, and they must even have similar voices. It's crazy. Rabbi Yehuda even says that the parents must also have the same appearance and height. So the parents could do it, Nathan, if they sounded alike, if they looked alike, and they were the same height. It's making it difficult. How could that ever happen? Parents declare, our child is a glutton and a drunkard. And so the sages understood that this means that the child cannot be considered a ben sorer, a wayward child, until he steals a certain quantity of meat and wine from his parents' home and eats it elsewhere. In fact, the rabbis specify that the son has to eat a double portion of meat and a half a log of Italian wine. It can't be Spanish wine, it has to be Italian wine.
That's pretty good.
How's that possible? Also, his parents must warn him in his act of rebellion before 3 judges. And the court flogs him. And if the child does, if that doesn't work, he must be taken before the court of 23 judges before anything can happen. The sages went so far as to say that there's only a brief period in a boy's physical development from the very beginning of puberty, perhaps maybe 3 months when the law was to be applied. And then the sages are even more specific. They say the mitzvah never was carried out, and it's here only for the sake of study. And here is Judaism at its best. You might say this is a crazy kind of interpretation, but something very clear is happening here. Judaism believes that when you confront a tradition that is reprehensible, that is difficult, that cannot be applied, that no longer makes any sense, is no longer relevant, it's necessary to alter the tradition in order to confront the new ethical and moral understandings. Now, this is not a unique interpretation within only our Judaism. All mainstream approaches to Judaism accept this idea. The rabbis of the Talmud and later rabbis can reinterpret. Reform Jews use these Talmudic ideas, believing that they could take the worship service and make it more streamlined and to change it. The conservative Jews use these Talmudic principles to liberalize the observance of the Sabbath and to change the role of women in Jewish life. The modern Orthodox movement itself has expanded the role of women, even ordaining women rabbis, and have taken a more progressive view of gender and sexual orientation. This is all because there is an acceptance that any traditional idea must be open to interpretation and reinterpretation. Without it, the tradition cannot survive. Yet as Jews, as we look at the world, our understanding of our own tradition leads us to be concerned about traditions that reject this kind of progressive understanding. Fundamentalism is dangerous in all forms. It exists, unfortunately, even in pockets of Judaism. There exists in parts of the Jewish community where one part of the Jewish community denigrates the religious life of another part of the Jewish community. For example, In the land of Israel, every month women gather at the Western Wall to read from the Torah, and there are those who vehemently object and instead of acting civilly, even throw things at these people. In the January 6th revolt in the capital, many of the insurrectionists were Christian extremists, expressing incredibly radical views, embracing a Christian nationalism, a cultural belief that America is defined by Christian identity, heritage, and social order that the government needs to protect. Many were caught up in this kind of very limited interpretation of American Christianity that is narrow, unhistorical, and fundamentalist. And we know the dangers that it has shown in our own political life. And look what we confront now in Afghanistan with the Taliban. Islam has its own interpretive tradition. The Quran is the foundational text. There are what are called the Hadith, which are the teachings about Muhammad that helps to explain the Quran. Sharia is called the path, which was created to help people interpret what the Quran means and the actions of the Prophet Muhammad. And Islamic law is always based on some kind of interpretation of the Sharia. There is evolution. The Taliban, however, are violent, intolerant fundamentalists. In their fundamentalist mindset, they support punishment in line with the most narrow, strictest interpretations of the Sharia, such as public execution of convicted murderers and adulterers, or amputation for those found guilty of theft. Men are forced to wear beards, and women are often forced to cover their entire bodies in darkness. This extremist and narrow interpretation of Islam has arisen because this expansive interpretation and evolution of traditions has been rejected. The Taliban's approach offends the overwhelming majority of Muslims. So here's what we're dealing with. This Shabbat, we see a biblical text that is beyond any comprehension in our current life. It is reinterpreted. It is said this text cannot be what we think it means, or we can no longer accept it because we have a greater ethical understanding perspective, and therefore we reinterpret it in order for it to make sense or to limit it within the modern world. And why is this important? Because if religions are forced to be within a kind of narrow interpretation that allows for no kind of new meanings, no kinds of liberalizations, no changes, religions that are supposed to be the source of love can be the source of hate. Religions that are supposed to expand our ethical awareness, they can end up limiting it and closing us down. So friends, on this Shabbat, when we think about this kind of crazy tradition of the wayward son and what we did to him and what we ended up not being able to do, I stand here being proud of being part of a religious tradition that says religion is a gift from God, but human beings have an obligation to interpret it, to expand it, to give our own wisdom, to our own meaning. Because the goal, I think, of Judaism, and especially the Judaism that we teach and affirm at the New Reformed Temple, is a Judaism that says religion should enlighten our minds, should soften our souls, should help us to build a world of reason, of tolerance, and of understanding. And I pray that we join together, people of all faiths, to stand firm in the idea that faith should bring us high values, developed ideas, sensitivity to the needs of others, and not a kind of fundamentalist narrow-mindedness that can poison civilization. May our tradition inspire us to do the kind of good things that need to be done so we can have a civilization rooted in peace and kindness and love. Shabbat Shalom. So let us continue in our service.